Hi once again, everybody. My name is Davey Davis. I'm your host for the show Far and Wide. It's the show that tries not to get too sophisticated beyond repair, the show that doesn't have teleprompters, makeup, and you name it. And today my guest is John Philpin. He's a noted radio personality, psychologist, a forensic psychologist, profiler, and author. John, welcome to the show, and thank you for being with us, because I know you haven't been feeling well lately.
No, I feel good now, though.
You look great.
Good to be here.
I mean, I know you broke a rib or two.
From coughing, believe it or not, yeah. I had pneumonia, and the cough, as the doctor put it, was a passionate cough. And,
Passionate cough.
Broke my rib. Yeah.
Well, good to see you feeling.
I'm over it, yeah.
Now, right off the bat, I'd like to talk about your radio personality, because a lot of people probably don't know that, this about you, that,
Sure.
I mean, you're one of my favorites.
Wow.
I don't want to sound too fawning, but I'll tell you, I love your commentary, the political commentary, the satire. It is fantastic.
Well, this would have been a really good year to be doing the show, and unfortunately I'm not doing it right now. I'd like to get it back on the air. But with everything we've had in Washington, with the election and the problems in Florida with the count, and there was all sorts of meaty material to get into. And now, of course, we have Jim Jeffords opting out of the Republican Party and opening up another, whole barrel of material. So it'd be nice if I were doing a show now, but unfortunately, we're not. We'll pick it up again at some point.
What is the name of that show? Uncle John's Band?
Uncle John's Band.
Yeah. Now, where did that come from?
That comes from a Grateful Dead song.
Okay.
The idea was that it would be a combination of music and commentary, and the music's fairly eclectic. It's mostly rock, folk, some unusual things that we play. We will have programs that are entirely devoted to live music, concert type performances, and we work in a lot of comedy, our own stuff that we've written, but also comedy routines done by other people. And I suppose the satirical idea behind it is it does have kind of a left-wing flavor, and of course the Grateful Dead have always been associated somewhat with the left side of things.
Yeah, they sure have. I wish folks you could hear this radio show. Perhaps you can sometime, because it's very funny, John. You've got a great sense of humor.
Thank you.
And
we had a great time with Fred Tuttle, of course.
And, yeah.
We did a live interview with John O'Brien, his campaign manager, and the fellow who did the movie. We had a good time with that, and like I say, a lot of stuff going on now that I think would make for interesting material. We're not going to run out of it. GW is going to be in Washington, we expect, another 3.5 years, so we'll have plenty of time to catch up.
Plenty time and material. That's
He's
for
good
sure.
for at least a gaff a day. So
Yeah, he is. I wonder what Russell Limbaugh's been saying lately.
Probably not a great deal.
Not a great deal. So, did you play guitar when you were younger?
When I was much younger, I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a combination of losing interest in it and not really having the time. Too many other things going on. But I did play for a while. Yeah.
And your wife has played as well.
She's a musician. Yeah, she was taught on the piano as a very young child, and then did play guitar for a number of years. I once said that I thought that she could probably pick up any musical instrument and play it. We had friends over one night, and one of them brought a fiddle. And before the evening was out, she was playing that fiddle and making it sound pretty damn good. And it was pretty amazing.
That's a difficult instrument to play.
Indeed. From where I'm sitting and I look at it, I think it's nothing like the others that she plays. But then she explains it to me in terms of the strings and keys and all. She knows it, I don't.
Wow, it's amazing. But you have a great knowledge of music, obviously. So.
Oh, I love music.
Yeah.
I may not be playing it, but I love to listen to music, and I like to listen to all kinds of music.
I think it's too bad this country doesn't have a wider variety of music that's played, every day.
On a regular basis.
On a regular basis.
Too much of it is packaged.
I agree.
We get a lot of stuff that we hear over and over again, and it's blocks of material, and it's syndicated, and what you hear here on local radio you probably would hear in some other town or city, if you're traveling across the country. It all has just a very sort of bland vanilla flavor to it.
It really does. I just heard some encouraging news today from my friend in Texas. He informed me that Houston has got this big radio station, and their format is changing to a more eclectic mix. And, so that was encouraging to hear that.
Oh, indeed. Yeah, especially when you have a sizable station in a metropolitan area going in that direction. It's great. Yeah.
A lot of the feeds seem to come out of Houston too, so
Yeah.
maybe we're on the upswing.
Yeah, could be.
Now, in your formative years, were you in Roxbury or Boston or somewhere?
I was born in Boston, and we lived in a tenement in the Roxbury section of Boston, the ghetto. Yeah.
So interesting times then, eh?
Well, yes. The one sort of unifying theme living in Roxbury wasn't the racial theme at all. It was a poverty theme. There weren't a lot of jobs. People were unemployed. It was immediately post-war. Well, I was born in '43, but after 1945, 1946, a lot of fellows were coming home from the military, my brother included, and there weren't enough jobs, and it was a poor time. It was a really tough time, and so we didn't have the kind of racial conflicts that you find in the inner city in a lot of places now, but or especially through the '60s and '70s, we didn't have those problems.
It's kind of like a level playing field because of the economy.
Yeah, no, everybody was poor. We had we used to joke and say there were shortages of things. Meat, for example, tin was another one that were due to the war. When you're poor, you don't know what's a shortage due to the war and what's a permanent absence in your life. You just don't know.
True. Huh. So you've got a full plate. I mean, you do all kinds of things. Probably you do a lot of things I don't even know about. But,
Well, I try, yeah.
I mean, not only are you, writing books. I mean, I've read almost all of yours now,
Yeah.
closing in on it, and I'm a fan there as well. So, I mean, you're always working. That's a lot of work. I mean, folks, to write books it's got to be tough. I mean, day in and day out, and then you're involved in criminal profiling as well.
Yes.
And I mean, my gosh, how do you do it all?
You just do it. I think, like anything, I think you have to enjoy what you're doing, and then it doesn't seem like work. And I certainly have a great time writing. I really enjoy it. And for me to sit down and spend a day working on a story, a book, is just a real treat. And so it doesn't feel like work. Profiling, it's a little different. I mean, it's still something that I enjoy, but the way I've always looked at that is that I found the general practice of psychology to be kind of boring. Especially toward the end, it became just a matter of too much having to take care of paperwork for insurance companies, and that isn't what I ever wanted to do. Was fill out triplicate and quintuplicate forms,
Right.
For insurance companies, and certainly there's a lot more going on in a forensic practice when you have to interact with law enforcement, attorneys, prosecutors, judges, the courts, the jails, and basically it's a lot of head work. To sit and analyze a crime and try to figure out exactly, what went down, what the choreography of the crime is. And then from that to begin to speculate on characteristics of somebody who could commit that crime.
So that's kind of, for the folks out there who aren't familiar with profiling, which I'm sure a lot of people are, because television has a lot to do with explaining it, but that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, when you do that.
Television goes a little bit overboard. All the media does, of course, and movies too. And they tend to over-dramatize it and, make it look like some sort of psychic experience. The TV program, The Profiler, I don't know if that's still on, but I saw it once or twice, and whenever she would have an insight, I remember the camera, all of a sudden everything would be in slow motion, and it would flash to black and white, and, eerie music would play, and it doesn't happen that way. That's not the way it works.
It's pretty scientific and
Very methodical.
methodical.
Yeah. I wouldn't call it a science. I know there's some people who like to call it a science, but it's not that. There's a lot of intuition involved. But you start with a solid factual base and then work from there.
You kind of have to take those leaps once in a while that'll get you there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's grounded in fact. It's not the kind of thing that simply pops into your head, and comes along and suddenly sends you in a different direction. It isn't that at all. You've got a good grounding in the evidence. The factual basis, and in a sense, what is happening is your own subconscious mind is doing a lot of the work for you. You don't have to sit there and struggle with it. You're thinking all the time whether you want to or not.
Now, people use your skills all over the country.
Yeah, all over the world actually.
All over the world.
I've had cases in England, Germany, Italy, one in Mexico, several in Canada, and the rest have been in the United States. My books are published in France and Germany as well as here in the United States.
Right. Now, I don't know the difference between a forensic psychiatrist and psychologist. Now Lucas Frank, in your book,
Mm-hmm.
the main character, he's a psychiatrist.
Right.
Now, what would be the biggest difference? See, I don't know about this.
Well, the biggest difference would be between psychiatry and psychology.
Okay.
Psychiatrist is a medical doctor first, and then goes through a residency in a mental institution, working with the mentally ill, learning about mental illness, the histories, symptoms, how they present themselves, this sort of thing. Psychologist is not a medical doctor. The psychologist studies beyond the bachelor's degree, usually for a doctorate in philosophy, in forensic psychology, which involves studying the law, studying the interaction of mental health disciplines and the courts, learning the difference between being someone who is there to educate a jury as opposed to an advocate, someone who's there to advocate for a position or for a client or something like that. And it's heavy on that aspect of it, the legal aspect of it. Probably when I was doing my doctorate, I studied as much law as I did psychology.
Wow. Now, your education was Harvard, I believe?
I went to Harvard undergrad.
Undergrad?
And, this is kind of interesting, really, because when I was there, even before I got there, the only thing in the world I wanted to be was a writer. I didn't want to do anything else. And in fact, during my interview, before I was even admitted, these gentlemen who were interviewing me kept putting pressure on me. Well, if you don't make it as a writer, that's a competitive field. If you don't make it as a writer, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm just going to write. And I had these images of the garret in Boston somewhere, and sitting writing the great American novel that goes unrecognized. But they wanted me to consider things like journalism and education, that sort of thing. And I wasn't willing to do it. I just kept saying, I'm going to be a writer. That's what I want to do. And so while I was at Harvard, I did major in English. I took all the writing courses they let me take. And I was going to head from there to the University of Washington. I had a fellowship in comparative literature, and I was going to do a doctorate in comp lit out there. But the war intervened, and student deferments were eliminated, and I was one of those people that considered myself in opposition to our involvement in Southeast Asia. So that created some real problems for me. And at that point, I had a bachelor's degree in English, and I thought I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up, but the real world interfered with that. And so I went to work in a mental institution as a child care counselor, working with emotionally disturbed children. And that was where I first started getting interested in problems of the mentally ill. From there, because of that interest, when I spent 4 years working in the hospital, I went on to a graduate degree in counseling psychology, or clinical psychology, a master's in clinical psychology, and then did a PhD in forensic psychology. Maybe I should help you with that just a little bit. One of the things growing up in the Boston area, we were surrounded by a lot of violence. I mean, there was a lot of violence. There were a lot of labor riots and things like that, and institutional violence as well as individual acts of violence. And within my family there was a lot of violence, and so this was something that intrigued me. Not general categories, but specific acts of violent behavior. Why do people do the things to other individual people that they do? And from the time I started working in the hospital, in every position I had after that, it was like having examples of violent behavior under a microscope, because you could see it so graphically, and you could see the motivation so graphically. And it's not always apparent. When you look at our culture and you look at the types of violent things that happen in this country, you can't always understand the mechanics of it. You can't understand always why this act came to be. And I felt I had an advantage, really, because I was observing it, but I was observing it in a controlled setting. And the big step for me, of course, was to go from a controlled setting into the wild, as it were, and starting to look at the way people act every day. So they don't have to be in mental institutions to do what they do.
So it all kind of just added up, and
Yeah.
it was a progression that was just kind of I don't know. It went the right way, and you caught what it was you wanted to do, and you've ended up doing. You're so lucky, I think, too. Is that a lot of people don't do what they want to do in their lives, and it looks like you are doing what you want to do.
Yeah. I mean, I had to wait a while.
Yeah.
It all kind of
coalesced.
I still remember being 18 and saying the only thing I ever want to do is write. I remember that vividly. Sure, I had a career or two in between, but I was in my 40s when I got my first book published. It's never too late, and I'm still not sure what I want to be when I grow up. So there's a lot of time yet.
Yeah, it's now I've been reading, of course, your books, and Lucas Frank. Now
Yeah.
he's a little bit crusty and
Oh yeah, he's a
cantankerous,
curmudgeon. Yeah.
And also he kind of doesn't trust the system and the bureaucracy, and there's a lot of tangled things in there, and he kind of can get through there to the. Now, of course, are you a lot like Lucas Frank? I mean,
Well,
that crosses your mind,
I'm not going to deny that there are certain biographical similarities there. He did grow up in the Boston area, and as far as being something of a curmudgeon, I guess I'd have to admit to that. Yeah. I guess there's no way to, and I've never really bothered to justify the attitude that if the system isn't going to work for you, you've got to find some other way to do it. And I'm not about to start justifying it now. I lived my entire life that way, and I'm sure I'm going to die that way. When it doesn't work, I'll find another way to do it. And I've felt over the years that looking at the kind of work that I've done, looking at the kind of work that Lucas Frank does, there are just some things that need to be done with a certain amount of haste, and you can't wait on the bureaucracy to take its action. So you have to just go ahead and move on it. So yeah, I mean, there are definite similarities there, sure. I'm just as impatient as he is. He lives in the Michigan woods, and I live in Vermont.
Yeah,
He's got Lake Albert.
Lake Albert.
I
Yeah,
don't.
Yeah, you don't have a lake yet.
No, if I want to go fishing, I got to drive.
Yeah. But gee whiz, the way you work, I mean, you're a prolific writer and all. I mean, it's fascinating to me that you're involved in this real life drama of people's lives and murder, etc. And you're able to write books and step lightly and the thin lines everywhere. I mean, that to me is fascinating, and you keep your sanity.
Oh yeah, I mean, maybe that's why I try to keep a variety of things in my life. I like being Uncle John. I like playing tunes. I like political humor. I like writing my own political humor. But there is a fine line, and I think there was a time in my life when I came pretty close to crossing that line. And of course, that's a theme in the Lucas Frank books, where it happens to him. He retires, and he doesn't want anything to do with that field anymore. No more profiling, no more chasing killers, that type of thing. And when it happened to be, it was probably during it was during the Valley murders back in the 80s. And it involved the victim who survived an attack. She was pregnant, she was stabbed 19 times, she lived through it, the child lived. And I worked with her for quite a while after that. And I had been in a situation where I'd been working for the police on these cases and developing profiles in the cases. Ellen Freed, Bernice Kudamar.
Oh, this is the
Jane Borowski.
I-91 Valley.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And Barbara Agnew, of course, just up the road. And so I'd been in a situation where what I had been doing was spending a lot of time identifying with the killer, the person who was committing these savage attacks, because I wanted to know how he thought, how he viewed the world, in order to develop some kind of usable understanding that the police could apply to their investigation. And so then here I had a living victim, and if you think about it, now I have to empathize with the victim. And I remember when it happened, we were sitting in the office, and I happened to glance up at her while she was talking, and I noticed these deep scars on her neck. And I thought, oh, where did those come from? Why does this young woman have those nasty scars across her throat? And then it hit me that that's where she was cut when he assaulted her, and that she had survived it. Well, so now I've got two things going on in my head. One is that I've identified with this killer, and the second is that I'm identifying with his victim. And that precipitated a pretty rough time. I had some series of pretty nasty dreams, and had trouble sleeping for a while. And I quit at that point. I said I'll never do it again. That lasted about 6 months. And then I was right back in it again.
It's like Lucas Frank. He comes back.
Yeah, they didn't have to drag me quite as hard as you have to drag Lucas, so.
Right.
You've really got to bait the hook to get him interested.
Yeah.
But they didn't have to do that with me. They just had to come up with an interesting case, and they did.
I didn't realize that she had survived, that there was a
Yes.
survivor.
Yes.
See, I never realized that.
Great description we got from her. A composite drawing was done from that. We had a partial license plate. Good description of the car. Never amounted to anything, but there was we had a lot of leads to work from that case. Yeah.
Wow.
This happened in Swansea, New Hampshire.
It was in Swansea?
Yeah.
So you believe that was part of
Oh,
that
absolutely.
whole circle?
Yeah, the MO, everything was very close. Yeah.
Is this, do you believe that individual is operating on, what drives this person? Is it obviously something sexual or some sort of abuse, younger?
Well, it's not so obvious. It might be those things, but we don't really know. You also have to define your terms when you're dealing with this sort of thing. Sexual assumes a different meaning when you're talking about serial murder. There may or may not be what we would consider obvious sexual behavior. May or may not be there. Because with many of the people that I have met who have done this, who have committed these kinds of crimes, people that I've read about, research that I've done, there is a fusion that takes place in their thinking between sexuality and aggression. And while we may superficially look at what they're doing and see no evidence of sexuality and say that it's a pure act of aggression, both dynamics are being expressed in the behavior.
And how many murders have there been in this circle? In this particular one?
I think at the time that the task force was working on the cases, they looked at, I want to say 6 to 8 cases in that series. There were others that we kind of kept, that we felt were kind of loosely connected. We weren't real sure about them. There was one off the interstate in Connecticut. There was another one off the interstate in Maine. Now I think the grand total that we had was up around between 9 and 11. But again, those other cases were cases that we never quite, put into the initial group.
And these killings have actually stopped.
Yeah.
It's been, what, at least 10 years? Or
I think maybe, it's been all of 10 years.
all of 10 years? Was it in the 80s?
Yeah. Late 80s.
Late 80s?
Yeah.
And most of the time, do people, serial killers, stop for that long a period of time? I mean, is it, maybe they'll go for 2 or 3 years, or will they go for 10 years? And then, I mean, has that been...
Well, when people, professionals have tried, law enforcement folks, other profiles, when they try to explain this, often what they do is to say, well, the person could have died. Green River Killer in Washington, you hear that all the time. Well, he's probably dead. Or he's in jail for some other type of offense, and that's why we're not hearing from him right now. I'm not going to quarrel with that because we don't know, and it may very well be the truth. But we also don't know how these people behave in the wild. We don't know what they're like out on the streets. All we know about them is what we know from after the point of their capture, and then it's reported information, and it's material that gets interpreted. We don't have factual data, not a great deal of it anyway, about how these people behave in their day-to-day lives. Now, what would be the impact on a person like this, say, if they're married and there's a birth of a child, or if someone close to them dies suddenly, and it's something that's totally unexpected. We don't know how they process those things in their lives. We know how we're affected by things like that, but we don't know what impact those life events might have on these people. So to say, well, he's in jail or he's dead, I don't think that that's all the possibilities. I think this person could have other events going on in his life that cause him to stop, either temporarily or permanently, and we just don't know.
Was there ever any, I don't know if I can ask this, but, I mean, ever any prints or some kind of clues, the woman that survived, for instance, did he leave anything behind that you might be able to identify?
Nothing hard and fast, in the way of solid evidence, forensic evidence. No, we never had anything like that. We had descriptions. We had several sets of descriptions from the different cases, but no, there was never any hard evidence. No.
And all these people were women that were
Yes.
murdered or assaulted.
Yes. When you look at serial murder, a lot of people don't particularly pay much attention to this, but these are crimes committed by men against females.
Yeah.
And it's like 99%, 98, 99% of the time. We do have an occasional female serial killer, but predominantly this is a crime committed by men, predatory men, against female victims.
It reminds me somehow of being at an 8th grade dance, and the girls were on one side and the guys were on the other. And it sounds pretty simplistic, but there's this great gulf created in our society between men and women.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these personalities, I think, are so, I don't know what the word is, but this great gulf, they can't cross it, and fantasies start to,
Sure.
and then it just evolves. I would think, I'm just guessing from...
Well, the first time I heard, I'm going to make the statement, and the first time I heard this statement, I kind of recoiled from it, and but the more I think about it, the more it's true. All men are predators. Now, think about it. You go back historically, men were the hunters. What were the women doing?
Yeah.
All men are predators. All men have some characteristics of the predator, and that is going to inform their relationships with other men. It's going to inform their relationships with women. It can't help but do that.
And I think basically women are predators too, in a different in a different way sometimes, just to generalize. I mean, I don't want to say that every man or every woman is this or that, but
in a far different way.
in a different way,
Yeah.
far different.
I think there's perhaps some psychological scripting, that women certainly employ every bit as much as men do. That could be described. I'm not sure. I think predatory is a little bit strong, but manipulative perhaps.
Well, this kind of primordial thing, if we go back, I mean, we, as males, we're certainly involved in violence in our
Absolutely.
predatory acts.
Yes.
So I often wonder if some of this is this genetic overloading of this primordial past, where people are just, they have this certain violent thing, and you combine it with other elements, and it comes out.
Well, yeah, and it comes out in a lot of different ways. We've been talking about individual acts of violence. You could also look at institutional violence. Who goes and fights the wars? Who's in the front lines of the wars? I know there's a whole argument now about equalizing that, but historically, that's been a man's thing. You grow up and you're expected to. Take a look at our culture and tell me that we don't have a violent culture. When you took history in school and you opened your history book, how was that book divided into periods of time? It was broken down by wars. You had the War of 1812. You had the Civil War, World War I. And I'm leaving out a lot of them, obviously, Spanish-American War. That's how we defined our history. Was in periods of wartime. Peacetime, wartime, peacetime, wartime. We are a violent people.
That's true. We certainly are a violent people. And these folks kind of individualize it in a way. I mean,
Sure.
uh,
When you think about something like compartmentalizing, there are a lot of people who go to war, men who go to war, come back from it, and make an adjustment into society, and they're fine. And there are a lot of men who don't. There's something that happens, and they bring back a degree of aberrant behavior, and they don't adjust.
yeah, we certainly see a lot of that probably from particularly the Vietnam War.
Korea, too.
And Korea was
Yeah.
kind of the forgotten war.
Yep.
I think people didn't pay much attention to Korea, but that was horrible,
Mm-hmm.
as horrible as any. I just hope we're kind of headed in a different direction. Speaking of that, I mean, do you think the serial killings are going to go maybe decrease a little, or do you think they're going to increase? I mean, I know that's a hard one it's hard to really say, but
Well, they've kept, from the 20s, 30s, 40s, it has gone from 1 or 2 a decade on up into the teens, and continued to rise. But through the 70s, 80s, 90s, there was pretty much a plateau, where you were looking at between, say approximately 2 dozen in a year. And it's plateaued there. It hasn't gone down. It hasn't gone up. And of course you have cases overlapping these years. There's been a lot of difficulty with identifying, when you have a serial killer at work, because you have a lot of jurisdictional problems between law enforcement agencies, an unwillingness to compare cases. An unwillingness to share evidence and so forth, and so the estimates for how many serial killers might be active in the country at any one time, they range all the way from 20 to 100, and they're guesses, they're approximations. We don't really know, but I get a lot of information that comes through here on cases across the country, and recently I know that there has been an active serial killer in Texas, more than one in California, more than one in Illinois, more than one in Florida, 2 in the same county in Florida. So, I mean, right away you're adding up the numbers and, coming up with a fairly substantial number. And these are just the ones I know about, say, in the last 3 months.
well, in a sense, these people are. I get the feeling that some of these killers are brilliant. I mean, they're obviously brilliant because they're able to evade the law. And the
Yes and
enforcement.
no. Yes and no.
I mean, do they
Some of them are very bright, sure.
cover their tracks?
Well, are they doing a good job of it? They will go an extended period of time. But think about how these guys get caught. It isn't profilers, who come charging into a warehouse, gun drawn, and get them. That doesn't happen. It isn't task forces, that surround the building and bring the guy out. It's Joe, the traffic officer, the patrol cop, who spots a missing license plate or a cracked taillight on a pickup truck, and there's a body in the back of the pickup truck, and that's a case. It was down on Long Island a few years back. That's how they get caught. And in Bundy's case, it was a traffic violation. Ted Bundy, who's a Vermonter, by the way. Do you know that?
Yeah, was he from Burlington?
Burlington. He was born in the Lund home in Burlington. Yeah. But when he was captured, it was a traffic violation. And I remember that one of the detectives who worked on the case said that he felt that giving Bundy the death penalty wasn't quite enough, that he should be required to go through remedial driver's ed before he got executed. But that's the way to get caught. Bundy is the one about whom there's probably the most mythology. He was above average intelligence. He was not a genius. He had a lot of characteristics that, away from this sort of charming facade, where he represented himself during the Orlando trial, I guess it was, in the Florida cases, and very charming, suit, necktie, the whole bit, and like I say, he was above average, but he wasn't a genius. He had a sock fetish.
Fetish
for his own socks. He collected. He felt insecure if he didn't have 40 pairs of socks. I don't know. But
he and Imelda would have.
Yeah, she had the shoes.
She had the shoes. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if he ever cross-dressed though. They might not have hit it off quite so well. And he was a chronic nose picker, chronic masturbator.
Huh.
When you hear about Ted Bundy, you picture this charming facade, and you get this whole story about superintelligence, and it's a bit exaggerated.
Of course, they can have that. They've got that charming facade.
Oh yeah, they do.
But in the background, there's all this maybe bizarre stuff.
Bizarre stuff, and
a
lot of insecurity that they managed to cover up. Yeah. Yeah.
And it kind of fuels their craziness.
Indeed.
And it touches them off at any. Something touches them off. It seems just like that.
Yeah.
In there. But I think a lot of them. I get the feeling too that they do like to think that they're pretty brilliant, and they're going to outsmart.
Yeah, they do.
The cops, and
yeah.
They really, that's one of their big things. And
Yeah.
I know it's interesting in your books, like the one I'm reading now is the Murder Channel, and Felix is the serial killer, and he's a big fella. He's 6'7".
Mm-hmm.
But you do such a masterful job of going first person with Felix,
Mm-hmm.
and then back to Lucas. So you see both of these energies kind of moving along, and eventually they're gonna collide.
Mm-hmm.
Something's gonna give, So you build that tension all the way through. But it's interesting that you can get into Felix's head like that.
Let me get to that in just a second. Have you gotten to the part where they drive back from New Hampshire yet?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm taking my time. You see, I was an English major, so I can admit, when I come to parts, I'm not a real fast reader. I like to just sit there. When I see something like what you write, and I love it, I just sit there for a minute and think about it. I love to just
Okay.
ponder stuff, and then I go on. So,
All right,
anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, you've got a treat coming up.
Okay.
They're going to make a trip together from Claremont back to Boston for the resolution of the story.
Oh,
And I think you'll see that interplay between the two characters on that drive.
good.
I was doing a talk at a local library a couple of years back, and in fact that was the first time that this question was asked. And since then, I've noticed that there's a website where they on the internet where they discuss my books, and the questions come up several times there. And I haven't answered that one yet. I'm kind of waiting on that. But the question was, it seems very much like with John Wolfe in The Prettiest Feathers and Tunnel of Night, and now with Felix in the Murder Channel, that I'm describing two sides of the same personality when I describe the good guy and the bad guy, Lucas Frank and the serial killer. And I don't take issue with that. I don't quarrel with that. I think everybody if they admit it to themselves, has a dark side. I don't think there's any question about it. I think it's fortunate that we choose not to indulge that dark side. But I think everyone is capable of violence, a violent act. I think everybody's capable of homicide under the right set of circumstances. So is it difficult for me to shift from somebody like Lucas Frank, who is out there doing a chore that is benefiting society, to shift into a head like Felix Zerbny, who is out there basically in destructive mode, tearing the society apart? No, it isn't. It isn't. And if it were difficult, then I think what I would be doing is denying to myself that there's a part of myself that that is capable of those things. Because there is.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with you. I think everyone does have a dark side, and that's what I think we battle that, our whole lives if we have a conscience.
Well, you can battle it, or you can acknowledge it, and get together with it, and
try to evolve to the right place and become full with life and understanding. Yeah. So, I think the first book that I read that you were involved with was Gainesville Murders.
Yes.
Beyond Murder.
Beyond Murder.
And that was a guy, Danny Rollins.
Danny Rolling.
Rollins, is that how they said it?
Rolling.
Rolling. Okay.
Yeah. From Shreveport, Louisiana.
He had a tortured past, for sure.
Yes, he did. Yep.
Yeah.
He also made some decisions along the way, though. I mean, a lot of people have a tortured past,
Right.
and they don't make the decisions that Danny made.
Yeah.
Danny was arrested, as you know, for the 5 student murders
Yeah.
in a 72-hour period in Gainesville, Florida, and he is on Florida's death row. Most of his appeals have exhausted, not all of them. I would expect we'll probably see an execution in the next couple of years. But he had killed 3 times prior to coming to Florida, in his hometown in Shreveport.
In Shreveport. Yeah.
And we know that he committed some additional sexual assaults, some pretty brutal physical assaults, where he had beaten people and left them for dead, and they didn't die. He was also suspected in some activity, some crimes that were committed in California, and it was during a time that he was in that area. That's never been proven. So you have an enormous amount of violence committed by this one guy, and certainly the Gainesville 72 hours, 5 dead. That's horrendous, and it froze that city. It terrified the city. The colleges all emptied out. Kids were going home, and you couldn't blame them. A city that typically would have 30,000 people in it, when school opens, was down to 12, 13, 14,000 people. And it was a real panic, and the panic spread from there because the parents are all over the country and wanting to bring their kids home. As far as where Danny's violence came from, he was abused as a kid. As I said before, though, to be abused that's not. You won't find abuse in Ted Bundy's background, for example. It isn't there. No one's ever demonstrated that. Yes, he was abused, but I think even more importantly than that, as a result of the abuse, how he chose to deal with it was to stay away from the house. This is from a fairly early age. We're talking about a kid 10, 11, 12. And hang out in the swamps.
Yeah.
And he would spend a lot of time alone. He would kill animals to eat. He ran into some pretty incredible characters, living out there in the swamps. And he would go off and self-sustain for days and days at a time. And of course, his family didn't care. Nobody was out looking for him. And because he had so much time to himself that he was away, he was free pretty much to do what he wanted. And this is one of those situations where his behavior escalated from voyeurism, looking in windows, to entering houses, occupied houses, but not hurting anyone, not injuring anyone, not even making his presence known, other than to leave a signature. banana peel left on the stairway, a chair placed on top of a table. I mean, ridiculous stuff. A pork chop taken out of the refrigerator and left on the dining room table. Things like that. And then he escalated from there to committing sexual assaults during home intrusion crimes. And from there, homicide is not a very big step.
No, he looked rather ordinary. I mean, I saw the pictures. He's an ordinary guy. He played guitar. He wrote songs.
Yeah, some good songs.
Did he write some good songs?
Yep.
Oh.
I have the material. I have the tapes that he recorded. Not only his material on, but that last statement that he made at his campsite before he went off to kill. This was just minutes before he killed his first victim. But as far as the music was concerned, actually one or two of the songs were pretty good. He's also a fairly talented artist. I have a drawing of his as well. Great detail that he puts in, pencil type drawings. Great detail that he puts in them. Tremendous amount of talent and potential there that obviously was never realized and never will be now.
It's too bad he didn't go the other way with his.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been much more pleasant
For everybody.
for everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, so how you feeling?
Pretty good.
Good.
Pretty good.
What are there some really, obviously some really bizarre things, or maybe some even humorous things in your line of work? I mean, things happen that are very unusual, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, sure. Unusual. Well, I don't know. I suppose. Well, you were commenting on Lucas Frank and the stuff that he gets himself into, and kind of the attitude of the curmudgeon. He's not going to be told no. If he feels something needs to be done, he's going to find a way to do it, even if that means bending the law,
Right.
just a little bit. And I've had a few situations like that where where I've been urged not to do something by the folks that I'm working with, the law enforcement folks, and I've gone ahead and done it anyway. And on occasion, I've got myself in little sticky situations, but usually get out of them.
Everything's worked out.
Everything's worked out. Yeah.
Plus, yeah.
I've been embarrassed a few times. Yeah.
So you obviously involved in a lot of court cases now. Most of the time, is it for the defense or
No,
prosecution?
prosecution.
Okay.
I started out in my practice doing work for the defense to testify in cases where there seemed to be mitigating circumstances, not around a homicide, but around other offenses. And through those experiences, I did have a one or two homicide cases in the beginning, and I started to think that with all of the time that I was spending talking to criminal offenders and to people who were involved in the court's disposition of their cases, I was learning a lot about behavior after the fact. I was hearing a lot of anecdotal information about crimes, and I started to wonder. I had the person in front of me, usually telling me about what it was they had done, and I started to wonder, if what you had instead of the person was the behavior, and instead of going from the person to the behavior, you went from the behavior to the person, and you can't walk in and out of a room without exhibiting behavior, without leaving behind some trace of yourself. Whether it's forensic evidence like the hair, off your body or your head, or a cigarette that you put out. Of course, that's got saliva, which is going to have DNA. It may have fingerprints on it, although paper is kind of porous. You're going to leave traces of yourself. There's going to be evidence of you wherever you've been. And so I started to wonder, well, what about psychological evidence? What about the way in a homicide case, the way a body is treated after death, post-mortem? What is that going to tell me anything about the killer? And of course it does.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about it, if a person stays long enough after killing someone, to manipulate the corpse or to arrange the scene, then right away there are certain things that you can conclude about that person. One is they're obviously not in a hurry to get out of there, so they're feeling pretty comfortable. They're not rattled. You know, they're not under a lot of stress and tension at that point because they can hang around and, you know, and set this thing up. So, you know, the answer was yes, and it kind of came from reversing what I had done in the beginning of my career and switching it around so that what I was doing had a lot more value to law enforcement and prosecutors.
So you've been pretty successful in your assessments and whatever.
As far as profiling and so forth?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have. You know, there's no hard and fast measure, and as I said earlier, it's certainly not a science. And I say again emphatically, no profile, no profiler, and no profile ever caught a killer. Mm-hmm. You know, what you're doing is you're providing information that can be used to help with an investigation, to guide it, maybe to focus it, to narrow the investigation. But you're not pointing a finger at any one individual. You're not saying this guy did it. And that's where, you know, a lot of people have a misunderstanding about the way this works. You know, if you were to say to me how many killers were arrested as a result of profiles that I had done, how many killers did I catch? None. I didn't catch any. How many times was I of assistance to law enforcement? They keep coming here.
Right. So,
you know, people aren't saying bad things. I guess they're saying fairly good things. I have a case now in California that is taking up a lot of my time. And, you know, I don't even know how they found me, but they did.
All the way from California.
Yep. This is my second California case. Yeah.
So it's just like Lucas Frank. I mean, here they come.
Sure, I never know where.
Yep.
Yeah. And I've had the lake, of course, it'd be dropping stuff in my lake and scaring the bass. You know.
Yeah.
Good
Well, there are
know.
lakes nearby, but
Yeah, I know.
of course you're not right on.
Yeah.
But now you were in the local newspaper about the Xantop investigation.
Yeah.
That one has just driven everybody crazy because they want to find out information and there doesn't seem to be any available or much.
Mm-hmm.
Public has been a bit, interested in what really happened. And of course they asked you about a profile and you gave an assessment.
I think there are a couple of things to say about that. One, I've kind of changed my opinion about the withholding of information. I was quoted early on, I know, being somewhat critical, very critical of the information being withheld. And my point at the time was that there were certain bits and pieces of information from any homicide that I felt, you know, could be released, that could be of assistance to the investigation. There's a way to use the media to your advantage, you know, rather than making an enemy of them. And then as I watched the later stages of the investigation unfold, I could see actually that it was a very smart decision not to release the information, because there were so many pieces of that puzzle that had not come together, that they had to fit into place. And I think they could have imperiled themselves if they had released more than they did. And of course, they haven't collected it all. You know, they're still working that investigatively, and they will, no doubt, right up until the time it goes to trial.
I think they've seen enough gaffes in the past in other cases that they're very cognizant of that fact, and they're going to get it right.
Yeah.
If they can.
Yeah. So overall, I ended up actually being fairly impressed with the investigative work that was done and the way it was handled. And you know, everybody's going to know the whole story, but they're just going to have to wait. I guess the first trial, the earliest, but we might see it would be January.
Certainly is a tragedy, and it's a bit tough on the town of Chelsea and all the people
indeed.
and families and everybody involved.
Yeah.
Xantos. And, now your books now, Tunnel of Night, The Prettiest Feather, Stalemate, The Murder Channel, and of course Beyond Murder.
Beyond Murder.
Now, is there one that I haven't?
Dreams in the Key of Blue.
Oh yeah, I've read that one too. Dreams.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure enjoying it. And I sure have enjoyed talking with you this afternoon, John.
Oh, it's been great. I've enjoyed it too.
Thank you very much.
I got to give you a plug here, you know.
Oh no.
Oh yeah, I do. You know, on Uncle John's band, we do play Davy Davis.
Oh well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, John.
Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yep.
All right.